A very special greeting to all the people who keep connecting with us at the Self-Awareness Conference. Today we will be talking about what the infradimensions are. Welcome to this broadcast to this Self-Knowledge Conference. We will begin by discussing what is a lower dimension. A lower dimension could be defined as a low level of consciousness. These are the places where people who finished their 108 existences and did not eliminate the ego have to go to purge their defects, to eliminate them with pain. Master Dante taught us that there are 9 Dantesque circles or 9 infradimensions, places where we will have to go to disintegrate each of our own errors. It is the place where all the energy could condense sexual when we expel it. And through these internal infradimensions, we are connected to the atomic hell. We could put it this way. If we do not manage to eliminate or cleanse our internal infradimensions, then unfortunately we will not be able to break free from these infradimensions. That is precisely why we would say that there are 2 moons. There is the visible moon, which is related to those psychological defects of our internal infradimensions. There is also the invisible moon. The invisible moon is intimately connected to the infradimensions of planet Earth. This means that some of our defects, which are in fact a part of our ego, are found in the hells of planet Earth. Through that invisible moon, the great defects of the planet are nourished and sustained. Based on this, let us reflect and thoughtfully analyze that there are 2 ways to eliminate the ego. One is voluntary and the other is involuntary. The voluntary way is the process in which we can self-observe those infradimensions and eliminate those negative aspects. That would be the correct way, the voluntary way. Through the tools that we are going to explain today, we will learn to more deeply understand the infradimensions so that we voluntarily can begin to gradually, step by step, cleanse them. However, there is also an involuntary way. The involuntary way is the process in which, after completing the 108 existences, people have to go through a very terrible situation, passing through each of the Dantean circles and eliminating their defects according to their own law. What does it mean to eliminate the defects according to their own law? Well, what this means is that, as we will study, if we are very lazy, there is a circle where all the lazy people are, and the punishment will be to feed laziness until the pleasure turns into boredom and pain. Afterwards, that boredom will increase to such high levels that it will produce such intense suffering that the defect will be destroyed according to its own law. The same thing will happen with the defects of anger. At first, the defects will be happy because they will be fighting, shouting, and offending. However, later on, anger turns into weariness, and then weariness into pain. By repeating the same action over and over, greater levels of pain and suffering will be experienced, until the defects begin to disintegrate. As I mentioned, Master Dante explains to us that hell is divided into 9 circles. The first circle will be the moon circle, where the lazy ones will be. The second circle will be that of Mercury. The third of Venus. The fourth of the Sun. The fifth will be the circle of Mars. The sixth of Jupiter. The seventh circle will be that of Saturn. The eighth of Uranus. And the ninth of Neptune. So now let's move on to study each of these 9 Dantean circles. We will be talking about our lower dimensions, which means we are going to study our own lower dimensions to break free from this hell of the planet. The first lower dimension is within ourselves at the coccyx bone and is known as the sphere of the moon. This is located within ourselves at the level of the coccyx bone. In this lower dimension, we will directly find what is known as the circle of the lazy. There are different types of laziness, such as idleness, but there are other forms as well, like procrastinating and putting things off for later. However, here we will especially find spiritual laziness. This type of laziness is very dangerous because when we become aware of the tools that can help us awaken our consciousness, an atom known as the Antichrist atom is activated. This atom seeks to prevent any of us from starting the work of awakening. It makes us feel very lazy to meditate, lazy to practice the arcane, lazy to practice conscious astral travel, and even lazy to teach this knowledge to others. If we do not overcome laziness, we will never be able to begin the work of awakening consciousness. In this first Dantean circle, which is also known as limbo, are found the people who have not been baptized. But what does this baptism truly mean? Baptism means raising and condensing the energy up the spinal column twice, thereby regenerating both the physical body and the vital body. When a person manages to carry out this important work of spiritual sex, they achieve internal baptism. That is why Dante told us that unbaptized children will have to go to limbo, referring to the consciences of humanity which are related to children who have not been able to complete these initiations. And what is the defect that will prevent us from doing this work? Obviously, it will be laziness. Now, let's talk a little about what the second lower dimension is. In the second lower dimension, we will find the sphere of Mercury. This sphere is located at the level of our instinctive center, and here is where we will find the defects of orgasm or ejaculation. Orgasm or ejaculation is understood as the expulsion of sexual creative energy through orgasm or ejaculation. Many people confuse fornication with adultery or having sex before marriage. However, today we will explain that fornication is the act of reaching orgasm or ejaculation. In this Dantean circle, we must study all the sensations and desires to reach orgasm or ejaculation: fear, premature ejaculation, sexual frigidity, fear of sex, fear of not having a partner, promiscuity, pleasure, carnal lust, and all the defects related to the instinctive center. We must learn to achieve true chastity. Why is it important? Because when a person spills their sexual energy, they end up eliminating the consciousness they carry within. It is estimated that when a person reaches orgasm or ejaculation, they can produce between 5 and 8 million psychological defects and relive the same number of defects. This allows us to understand that if we do not eliminate the defect of fornication, orgasm, and ejaculation, we will never be able to progress. We must understand that orgasm and ejaculation are defects that directly go against the Divine Mother. Since our Divine Mother is our own creative sexual energy, this is second inferior dimension within ourselves, where all the defects that enjoy spilling sexual energy are found. Now let's study the third inferior dimension in detail. This infradimension is located at the level of the navel, above the spine. In this inferior dimension, we will find all our various defects as they move through pleasure and suffering. Therefore, we can say that all of our desires are found here. Desires for pleasure, the desire to either all our egos of gluttony, desires to drink alcohol, the desires of those who like to use drugs, the desires of those who love music, parties, revelry, the defects that love to fall in love, adultery, that defect that loves to feel emotional attraction for several people, to feel in love. Those are a kind of defect in the circle of Venus, but we will also find another type of defect, those of suffering. Let us remember that pleasure sooner or later will always lead us to pain. So on the other side, we find defects that feel lonely, defects that feel depressed, states of self-pity, defects that are heartbroken because the loved one does not love them or has done them wrong, defects of jealousy, defects that are in a constant state of pessimism. These are very terrible psychological states that unfortunately end up making us slaves. Here we must understand that if we feed any pleasure or feed any pain, that defect will take over more and more of our will. And when the defect takes over more and more of our will and intelligence, we end up becoming slaves. Here it is necessary for us to learn how this process of desires can be resolved. And the secret lies in learning to deny ourselves. If we begin to deny ourselves pleasures, at that moment we regain our will, and that makes us become free. But if we choose the path of feeding each of our desires, we will end up becoming slaves. That is why it is so important for us to learn to self-observe, to discover when these desires to eat, to consume drugs or alcohol arise, and at that moment eliminate them through the petition. Divine Mother, eliminate this defect is the petition we should make. Refuse the desire, and in this way, we will begin to recover the will. This is the third lower dimension. Now, let's move on to study the fourth lower dimension. This fourth lower dimension is located at the level of our heart and is known as the significant sphere of the sun. In this sphere, we will find all the defects related to greed, which can be categorized and summarized into two types of defects. First, we will identify the very wasteful defect, which is the one that loves to spend. For example, often during holiday seasons, we can see this defect in those who love to spend on anything. And on the other hand, we find the other aspect, which is the miser or the quite stingy person. So those defects that are always thinking about business, always thinking about money, always thinking about suffering, about debts, about how I can invest my time and my money, well, we find them there in that lower dimension. Here it is important to understand that these defects in either of their two poles will end up leading us to imbalance and will end up leading us to poverty. We have to learn to overcome these defects, to achieve balance, to value our riches. The wealth of every human being is energy and time, and we have to learn to use our time and our own energy wisely in order to be able to eliminate each one of these psychological defects. All right. Very good. So we need to learn to self-observe at every moment those wasteful behaviors, whether of energy, money, or time, as well as our stingy defects, which are the defects found in the fourth circle of our own lower dimensions. Let's go a little further down now. We're going to study the fifth Dantean circle. In the fifth Dantean circle, we will find the defect of anger. Here, this fifth Dantean circle is known as the fifth circle of Mars, or the sphere of Mars, and it is located at the level of our throat in the motor center. Since it is related to the motor center, we will find anger in words, in actions, and in omissions. So this is where the defect of shouting appears, the defect of raising one's voice, the defect of humiliating, the sarcastic defect, the defect that wants to offend the other person, everything that has to do directly with words. Here we already find anger as actions, the murderous defect. One feels a desire to hit or even kill someone, anyone, or anything. That feeling is part of our lower dimensions of anger. Omissions are also found there when, because of anger, for example, we do not want to do a favor, we do not want to help other people because we feel hurt, we feel humiliated, and we want to take revenge. Our defects of anger lie in the fifth Dantean circle. It is necessary for us to learn to work on these two defects, both the defect of passive anger and the defect of active anger. Passive anger is known as fear because many times out of fear one loses the strength to react, and at other times fear causes us to end up reacting with anger. How do we work on the persistent defects of anger? How can we overcome these challenging defects? Today we are going to carefully study two keys. The first key is to understand that when one feels anger, one must learn not to react. Remember, this Dantean circle is related to the motor center, which is the one that acts. When I am in a bad mood, I should not react, I should not speak or do anything, and I should not make decisions in that state. On the contrary, the right thing to do is self-observe and begin to notice each little detail of anger and start to eliminate them. My Divine Mother, kill this defect in me is the secret. I am going to feel a knot in my throat, but when I must observe that knot and eliminate it, my Divine Mother, kill this I in me. We must learn not to react. Once we have eliminated anger, we will be able to react and speak with calm and tranquility. The second key that teaches us how to overcome anger is learning to observe impatience. Impatience is that urge that many of us feel at a given moment. Things aren't done quickly or because we lack patience with others. It's necessary for us to observe that anger, that impatience, which is generally noticed here in the instinctive center. For example, when we're hungry and we're not served quickly, that's when we can observe that impatience. If you observe that feeling of impatience and gradually eliminate it, you begin to regain strength, the strength to deny each of our own mistakes. That is the fifth Dantean circle. Let's continue moving forward in this exercise of studying our own infradimensions. Now, let's carefully study the sixth Dantean circle. This circle is known as the sphere of Jupiter. In this sixth infradimension, we will find all the tyrants. This sphere is located here in our pituitary gland, directly over what is, well, the pituitary gland. There lie our defects of tyranny. What is a tyrant? A tyrant is someone who violates the free will of others. Let us remember that there is something very valuable that God gave us, which is freedom, and the tyrant is the one who wants to subjugate another, to take away their freedom so that they do what one believes is right. That is tyranny. We have to learn to respect free will. We are going to find our little tyrant self, which is the one that tyrannizes people who are, in quotation marks, on a lower level. For example, the mother tyrannizes her children, the child tyrannizes his younger sibling, the father tyrannizes his wife, the boss tyrannizes his employee, and, the boss can be tyrannized by the other partners, and so on. It ends up becoming a chain. It is necessary for us to learn to respect free will and to eliminate these defects of tyranny, because a person who is very tyrannical will never be able to attain wisdom. Remember that the beginning of wisdom comes with free will. When one makes mistakes and reflects on them, that is when one begins to gain wisdom. When someone is a tyrant or lets themselves be tyrannized, they will never have these understandings. So we need to observe at every moment these psychological defects that often attack us and disguise as virtues. Master Dante says, most tyrants found there do not understand why they are in that lower dimension. Politicians, for example, feel that what they are doing is right, that it is for the common good, when in fact it is not for the common good. The father who forces his son to eat the hard way, he thinks he is doing things right, but without realizing it, he is falling into this error. So it's important we learn to observe the infradimension of Jupiter. Now let's study the seventh infradimension. This seventh infradimension is known as the mysterious Dantean circle of Saturn. This Dantean circle is located in the pineal gland. And here we are going to find violence. We are going to find different types of violence. We will encounter the first type of violence, which is violence against the Holy Spirit, and it is related to sexual violence. Here we find our defects of adultery, our homosexual defects, our lesbian defects, our defects of masturbation, our defects of orgies, our defects, even pedophilia. Everything that constitutes sexual violence, for example, having sexual relations while the woman is pregnant. Those people who subject themselves to sexual violence by falling into celibacy. Remember that sex is not bad. It is the gateway to achieving freedom of consciousness. But it is necessary to learn how to use it and let go of aberrations to find what true chastity is. Well, but there are other types of violence. We find violence against nature, such as those people who castrate animals, who mistreat animals, who graft plants, who genetically modify them well. All of this refers to violence against nature. Those people who burn forests, who pollute, all of that refers to what is violence against nature. And within violence against nature, we also find violence against oneself, those defects that want to commit suicide, those defects that hate their own physical appearance, those defects that want to undergo surgery, harming the integrity of their own body, those defects that starve themselves through anorexia and vanity. All of these are defects directly attacking nature, violence against oneself. We find another type of violence, violence against others. Here we find defects planning harm to others, separatist defects, defects seeking revenge, defects hurting another's heart for revenge. All these types of violence must disappear, as much of our consciousness is trapped here. Here we recover over 50% of our consciousness. When we begin to work on the awakening of consciousness through astral unfolding, this is one of the circles we are told to work to move forward. That is why it is important for each of us to analyze this infradimension. Now, let's study the eighth Dantian circle. This eighth Dantian circle is known as the circle of Uranus, and here we will find that it is directly related to our sexual energy. This creative sexual energy is connected to our Divine Mother, to the truth, to that which never fades, and the opposite of this truth is falsehood. Therefore, in this eighth Dantian circle, all our lying defects are found. We will encounter different types of lies. For example, there are those who lie for money. So all the lies we tell to get money, to make deals there, we will find all those kinds of lies. We will find another type of lie, the lie of religion. So those egos that impersonate, that make it seem as if they are on the right path. For example, there we find fanaticism, our fanatical egos. We find black magicians, our sorcerer defects. If we are fascinated by witchcraft or by going against what is true, then that is where we will find those psychological defects. And we also find the imposters, those who pretend to be or impersonate others. All those defects can be found here. It is necessary for us to understand that truth is God, truth is consciousness, the spirit, and when we go against the spirit by telling a lie, we are falling into this error. That is why it is so important, through self-observation, to observe each of these psychological defects. Those that love to lie. Many times we lie for no reason. Many times we lie to avoid making someone uncomfortable. But we do not realize the seriousness of what we are doing, since we are directly linking ourselves to this infradimension of Uranus. Now, to finish this topic of the internal infradimensions, we will talk about the ninth sphere, known as the Circle of Neptune. Here is where we find the defects of betrayal. What is betrayal? We will summarize betrayal as the process in which we made a pact, either through the verb, perhaps signed, or simply with a handshake. So when we commit to something and do not fulfill it, then we fall into betrayal. Here we will especially find the defects that betray the work. What is betrayal of the work? When we begin to take an interest in this process of awakening consciousness, we start to desire it, and we even make an internal vow that we are going to achieve self-realization. If we make that vow and do not work on ourselves, we will fall into what is called betrayal. We will find that betrayal is divided into three defects. The first defect is desires or temptations. The second defect will be justification, which is the mind. And the third defect would be ill will. All our psychological defects are judged as betrayal. When someone is about to feed laziness, they feel the urge to indulge, justify themselves, then fall into ill will and keep sleeping or procrastinating. Note how the three traders appeared. If we observe, we notice desire for laziness. My mother killed this defect in me. The justification, my mother killed this defect in me. Ill will, same with fornication. When we feel urge, we can stop it. If justification appears, no big deal, let's do it once more last time. That's when you observe desire, justification, ill will, and eliminate them. Same for pleasure, suffering, both fed by desire, justification, ill will. Anger, violence, same. The justifications for tyranny, violence, and lying, all defects are judged as betrayal. And if we learn to observe our desires, our justifications, and our ill will, we will be able to observe each of these 9 infradimensions, these 9 Dantean circles. And therefore, we will be able to change. This topic we are discussing here about the infradimensions could be defined as the synthesis of self-knowledge. From these infradimensions that we are talking about today will come all the wisdom, all the love that we need to awaken our consciousness. That is why it is necessary for us to begin self-observing from moment to moment to discover details of laziness, fornication, pleasure, greed, anger, tyranny, lying, and betrayal. If we remain attentive, we can eliminate these defects and recover all the wisdom of the infradimensions. Thank you all very much for accompanying us up to this point. These are our contact details. Remember that you can reach out to us, leave your comments, share your questions in the comments, and we will be very attentive in responding to each of your concerns. Thank you very much for watching the conference. See you soon.